Some mornings feel like any other. Routines etched in quiet repetition, moments passing by without consequence. But there are also mornings when the air carries a different weight, when something beneath the surface seems poised to shift. And on this particular day, somewhere between the hum of engines and the click of polished shoes on linoleum, such a moment was beginning to form. At Gate 12 of Reagan National Airport, the boarding process for Flight 786 to Denver was proceeding smoothly. Passengers filtered through, some juggling coffee cups, others clasping phones, and many already lost in the rhythm of departure. The scent of brewed espresso lingered in the air. The announcements played on loop. Everything was business as usual until he arrived. Nathaniel Brooks stepped forward with the ease of someone unbothered by attention but accustomed to silence. He was dressed not in the conspicuous flash of wealth, but in a deep charcoal overcoat, navy wool scarf tucked gently at his neck, and a leather satchel polished by time and travel. His face, lined but resolute, carried a calm gravity. There was no entourage, no badge of status. Only a quiet man, dignified and measured, carrying a book of poetry and a boarding pass marked Seat 1A, First Class. To anyone who knew who he was, the sight was humbling. Nathaniel Brooks, a distinguished federal judge, had presided over some of the most pivotal civil rights cases in recent years. His reputation in the legal community was sterling, his opinions widely cited, his words measured but profound. But to the gate agent and the first-class flight crew, he was just another black man in line. As he approached the jet bridge, he nodded gently to a young mother soothing her child and gave a slight smile to a flight attendant preparing drinks just beyond the entrance. There was no arrogance in his steps, no entitlement in his bearing. He handed his ticket over without a word, stepped into the cabin, and calmly placed his satchel in the overhead bin above Seat 1A. That was when she saw him. Karen Stroud, the lead flight attendant on board, had been with the airline for 18 years. She prided herself on her precision, uniform always immaculate, hair pulled tight into a practical bun, and a clipboard filled with every detail of her section. She was efficient, unapologetically blunt, and very good at judging what she believed to be proper. So when she turned toward the front cabin and saw Nathaniel settling into the window seat at 1A, something inside her bristled. She approached with rehearsed authority. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice clipped and her smile tight. "May I see your boarding pass?" Nathaniel looked up with calm eyes. "Of course," he replied, reaching into the pocket of his coat and handing it to her. Karen examined it briefly, too briefly. The seat number, the class, and the name, all in order. But something didn't sit right with her. "I believe there's been a mistake," she said. "This seat is reserved." Nathaniel tilted his head slightly, a trace of confusion creasing his brow. "Yes," he said evenly, "reserved for me." Karen hesitated. She looked again at the pass, then at him. She wasn't used to being questioned. She wasn't used to her assumptions being wrong. "I'm going to have to ask you to move to the rear of the plane," she stated, not asking, but informing, as if protocol were on her side. There was a pause. Nathaniel didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He merely looked at her, held her gaze, and slowly rose to his feet. The few passengers already seated in first class shifted uncomfortably. A man in 1C raised an eyebrow. A woman across the aisle lowered her phone. No one said a word. Nathaniel gently removed his satchel from the overhead bin and walked down the aisle toward the back. With each step, the silence grew heavier. A young flight attendant, Lena Hart, barely out of her training program, stood near the galley witnessing everything. She had read about Nathaniel Brooks in law school, admired him even. But in that moment, her training told her to stay silent. Her instincts told her otherwise. Karen returned to her station with a satisfied nod. The seat was now empty. The order, as she saw it, was restored. But what Karen failed to see, what she would never have imagined, was that Judge Nathaniel Brooks had already sent a brief, quiet message from his phone before taking his new seat. It was only a sentence, no more than a dozen words. But those words would soon ripple far beyond the cabin of Flight 786. Outside, the sky remained clear. The wheels of the aircraft slowly turned. To the unknowing eye, it was just another morning flight about to take off. But to those on board, a lesson was quietly beginning, one that would expose the cost of bias, the weight of silent judgment in the power of dignity when it refuses to shout. Row 23. A window seat near the back of the aircraft. That was where Judge Nathaniel Brooks now sat, his tall frame quietly folded into a space never meant for dignity. He didn't protest. He didn't demand explanations. He simply adjusted the cuffs of his coat, opened his book of Langston Hughes poetry, and let the plane's quiet chatter surround him. But those who noticed, those who saw, were not so composed. Lena Hart, the junior flight attendant, stood near the rear galley, fidgeting with the edge of her uniform sleeve. Her mind raced. She had recognized the name on his boarding pass even before he was pushed aside. Nathaniel Brooks. Not just a respected federal judge, but a man who had once sat across from the president in discussions on judicial reform. A man who had helped overturn a discriminatory housing ordinance in her very hometown. A man who had once said, "Dignity is not negotiable, even when denied." And yet, Karen had dismissed him like an unruly passenger. Lena glanced toward the front. Karen stood near 1A, chatting confidently with a man in a business suit, offering him a complimentary glass of champagne. "An upgrade," she explained with a smile. The man looked confused but grateful. He had just been handed a first-class seat. He hadn't asked for it, and he certainly hadn't questioned why it had become available so suddenly. But then again, that was the nature of passive advantage. It often arrives without warning, earned not by merit but by assumption. Somewhere near the center of the plane, a mother whispered to her teenage son, "That's the judge we saw on TV, isn't it?" The boy nodded slowly, his face clouded with questions he didn't yet know how to ask. Meanwhile, back in row 23, Nathaniel turned a page slowly. He wasn't reading anymore. Not really, his thoughts drifted, not to anger, but to resolve. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened, but each time it struck deeper, not because it was louder, but because it was still so quiet. The casual way it was done, the ease with which people accepted it, the way discomfort, rather than justice, was allowed to dictate decisions. He pulled out his phone again. One message, one person. That was all it would take. Because what Karen didn't know, what no one on that crew had stopped to consider, was that Nathaniel Brooks was not flying to Denver on vacation. He was en route to deliver a keynote address at a national conference on corporate ethics and bias in workplace culture, an event co-sponsored by the airline itself. And the CEO, the very man funding the event, a former student of Judge Brooks, a protege, a friend. Up in first class, Karen sipped her sparkling water with a quiet sense of accomplishment. She prided herself on maintaining standards. After all, she'd seen passengers try to sneak into better seats before. And sometimes, unfortunately, certain types were the worst offenders. She didn't say it aloud, of course. She never did, but she felt it. And that, in her mind, was enough. She turned to Lena with a clipped tone. "Please make sure row 23 has been properly attended to before takeoff." Lena hesitated, her hands clenched at her sides. "Yes, ma'am," she said softly, then turned and walked the length of the plane, her heart pounding. As she reached row 23, she paused. "Sir," she said gently, lowering her voice so others couldn't hear, "I just want you to know, I saw what happened, and I'm sorry, that wasn't right." Nathaniel looked up at her. His eyes, kind but weary, held hers for a long moment. "Thank you," he said simply. She nodded. "If there's anything I can do—" "There is," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Remember what you saw. Speak when it matters." Lena nodded again, this time with more weight. She understood. As the plane taxied toward the runway, an uneasy calm settled over the aircraft. The pilot's voice came over the intercom with routine announcements. The engines hummed to life, and the safety demonstration began. But beneath the surface, the wheels were turning in more ways than one. In a sleek glass office tower thousands of miles away, a phone buzzed once. A man in a Navy suit picked it up, read the message, and slowly stood from his desk. The message was brief. It didn't need details. "Flight 7A6, Gate 12. Situation unfolding. We need to talk." He didn't hesitate. He picked up the phone. Back on the aircraft, somewhere over Ohio, Karen walked the aisle with confidence, offering drinks with her practiced smile. She had no idea that within the hour, her name would be flagged in a system audit. That a conference panel was being adjusted. that a private call had already been made to HR, that someone had requested the passenger manifest, that the storm was not coming, it had already begun. And Judge Nathaniel Brooks, he turned back to his book, finally letting himself read. His finger paused beneath a line that seemed to echo the air around him. I too sing America. At 8:14 a.m., precisely 15 minutes after Flight 786 left the tarmac, a glass door slid open on the 42nd floor of Aurelius Tower, the headquarters of Altura Air. Inside the executive boardroom, the atmosphere was unusually tense for a Monday. A team of senior leaders, dressed in tailored suits and impeccable posture, sat around the long walnut table, reviewing numbers, discussing quarterly trends, and prepping for the upcoming Ethics in Aviation Summit, a key event for branding the airline as an industry leader in equity and reform. But that illusion of control shattered when Kenneth Aldridge, CEO of Altura Air, entered the room with uncharacteristic haste. Pause everything, he said, voice low but firm. He placed his phone on the table, screen facing down. His expression was unreadable, stoic but deadly calm, the kind of calm that suggested something big was about to break. I just received a direct message from Judge Nathaniel Brooks. He's on our flight 786 to Denver, and he was moved out of first class. The room fell silent. Kenneth looked around, his eyes scanning the group like a teacher waiting for a student to admit guilt. No one spoke. No one dared. He didn't elaborate, Kenneth continued, pacing slightly now. Just said, we need to talk. Something you've been preaching inside these walls is not being practiced inside your aircraft. A younger VP, Jordan Crane, head of customer relations, cleared his throat. Could it be a seat misassignment? Or maybe a technical glitch in the manifest? Kenneth's eyes narrowed. Let me be clear, he said. Judge Brooks doesn't message for technical glitches. He doesn't name names. He doesn't need to. When he speaks in that tone, it means something systemic just got exposed in real time. He turned to Maya Thompson, head of DEI initiatives. She had worked with Judge Brooks personally. She looked pale. Get me the crew roster for that flight, now. Yes, sir. Kenneth took a breath, then reached for his phone again. Also, get me Karen Dwyer's full employment record. I want her training logs, incident reports, and customer reviews. Everything. One of the older board members leaned forward. Should we wait until he lands before making a move? Or, no, Kenneth interrupted. We don't wait. That's exactly the kind of passive posture he's warning us about. If this is what I think it is, an unconscious bias issue that manifested in a high-profile seating decision, we cannot afford to hesitate. Silence again. The stakes were more than reputational. Altura Air had just secured a $400 million joint deal with federal partners to expand routes under a new social equity and accessibility program. That contract hinged on demonstrated leadership in inclusion and ethical conduct. A public incident involving one of the country's most respected black judges? It could burn that bridge overnight. Pull security footage from Gate 12, Kenneth added. I want to see who assigned the seats. I want audio. I want the body language. And I want it in the next 30 minutes. Maya nodded. She had already started texting her compliance team. Outside the boardroom window, the city buzzed below. Taxis moving like currents, people unaware of the silent reckoning unfolding above them. But inside, the storm had already touched down. Back in the sky, Judge Brooks remained composed. From the outside, he looked like any passenger immersed in a quiet book. But inside, his mind calculated with surgical clarity. He had debated whether to send the message at all. He knew the implications, the weight his name carried, the way systems often scrambled when called out by someone who wasn't supposed to speak up. But silence was no longer an option. Not when passivity had become a shield for prejudice. He didn't seek punishment. He didn't want revenge. What he wanted was pattern disruption. He wanted someone like Karen Dwyer, someone who believed they could politely deny respect under the guise of procedure, to be asked one simple question. Why? Why had she assumed he didn't belong? Why had she not explained? Why had she allowed her discomfort to outweigh his dignity? And more importantly, how many times had she done it before without consequence? Lena returned with a cup of tea, quietly setting it on the fold-out tray. She didn't speak this time, but her eyes lingered for a second longer than usual. "I've sent a message," Nathaniel said softly, without looking up. "Not to embarrass, but to educate." Lena nodded, her throat tightening. "I think it'll matter. I hope it will." He closed the book on his lap and looked at her for the first time since the exchange. "Hope is good," he said, "but policy change is better." Down below, Maya burst back into the boardroom with a tablet in hand. "I have the footage," she announced. She pressed play. The room watched as the gate camera replayed the morning scene. Karen Dwyer approached the gate computer. A quick scan of passenger upgrades. She paused at Nathaniel Brooks's name. Her face changed slightly. Then after glancing down the corridor, she typed something quickly. Reassignment confirmed. A few seconds later, she greeted a white businessman, handed him a new boarding pass with a smile, and said, "We had a last-minute opening in first. Enjoy." No verification, no system-triggered adjustment. It was a manual override. "This wasn't a glitch," Maya whispered. "This was judgment." Kenneth exhaled slowly. "We're no longer talking about training. We're talking about liability." He stood. "Get her on the next flight back. She's suspended immediately pending full review. And if that review confirms what we're seeing here, she's done." The boardroom was silent, but beneath the stillness, something shifted. This was no longer about one incident. It was about who Altura Air was and who they claimed to be. Kenneth picked up his phone one last time. He typed a short reply. "Understood. Consider it handled." And he meant it. Because when giants like Judge Nathaniel Brooks speak, the sky listens. 30 minutes into the flight, the cabin of Altura Air Flight 786 had settled into a calm rhythm. The gentle hum of the engines, the quiet rustling of newspapers, and the occasional clinking of a coffee cup made up the background music of the morning. But beneath that calm veneer, something had shifted. Passengers had noticed the change. Small, nearly invisible cues, like the way the lead flight attendant, Lena Morrison, had grown quieter, more thoughtful, her actions sharper with intention. Or the way two crew members exchanged glances near the galley as if bracing for impact. There was tension in the air, not turbulence from outside, but from within. And at the center of it all, Nathaniel Brooks sat with remarkable composure. His body was still, but his presence filled the space around him like an unspoken challenge. It wasn't arrogance. It was the quiet power of someone who knew who he was and was no longer willing to shrink. In row 11B, a young woman named Riley Evans, half black, half Korean, had been watching silently since boarding. She had recognized him, not because she knew him personally, but because she had seen his lectures online. She had once quoted him in a college essay about systemic bias. And now he was here, live, breathing, and being treated as if he didn't belong. She leaned over to her seatmate, a white man reading the Wall Street Journal. "That's Judge Brooks," she whispered. The man glanced up and then turned back to his paper. "Never heard of him." Riley's eyes narrowed. "Maybe you should." In the galley, Lena's fingers trembled slightly as she prepared another round of drinks. She had been a flight attendant for 18 years. She had seen panic attacks, in-flight proposals, crying babies, and even a mid-air birth once. But this was different. It wasn't chaos, it was a shame. The kind that crept in slowly, eroding confidence with every passing minute. She had watched what happened at the boarding school. Watched Karen Dwyer override the system without blinking. Watched her greet the white male passenger like royalty and ignore the man with the cane in quiet strength. Lena had hesitated then. She had wanted to say something, but she hadn't. And now the silence was louder than any protest could have been. Her earpiece crackled. The captain's voice came through, quiet but firm. "Lena, just got a priority signal from HQ. There's going to be a change in protocol when we land. You'll be briefed. For now, just keep the service smooth." Lena took a breath. Protocol. That word never meant anything good when it came from the upper floors. She closed the coffee pot and walked down the aisle. As she passed Judge Brooks, she paused. She started, then stopped. He looked up, eyes calm. "Yes? I just wanted to say," she lowered her voice, "I saw what happened. I didn't speak when I should have, and I'm sorry for that." A long pause followed. Brooks didn't rush his reply. "Silence is how systems stay intact," he said quietly, "but recognition is how they begin to crack." Lena nodded slowly, a tear threatening to form. "Thank you," she whispered. "Truly." Meanwhile, 35,000 feet below, in the buzzing heart of social media, something unexpected was happening. Riley, the young woman in seat 11B, had sent a single tweet during boarding. "Just watched a first-class seat get yanked from an older black man. No explanation, just gone. Then saw who it was. Judge Nathaniel Brooks. Altura Air. You just picked the wrong man." At first, the post gathered a modest stream of likes, a few quote tweets, but then someone influential picked it up, then another, and then a third. By the time the plane crossed over Kansas City, the tweet had over 100,000 views. The hashtag Judge Brooks on board began trending, screenshots of his court cases, quotes from his talks on implicit bias, photos from past conferences. The internet was waking up to the moment, and it was not happy. Inside Altura Air's social media command center, alarms were quietly going off. The name Brooks now appeared in over 5,000 mentions per hour. A PR specialist glanced nervously at the screen and turned to her supervisor. "This is spiraling." "Call corporate," the supervisor said. "Now." Back in the air, Karen Dwyer finally stepped out from the crew quarters after nearly 40 minutes. She had been suspiciously absent from the aisle since takeoff, claiming paperwork issues. But in truth, she had been checking her phone. Something in her gut told her something was wrong. She was right. Multiple missed calls. A message from her union rep. A company-wide alert was tagged urgent. And then she saw it. The trending tweet. The name. Her face turned pale. She walked down the aisle, suddenly self-conscious of every glance. Were people looking at her? Did they know? She caught Lena's eye. The two women locked gazes for a second. Karen tried to offer a dismissive shrug, a silent, "This is overblown." But Lena didn't blink. Instead, she walked directly to Karen and said in a voice just low enough for only them to hear, "You should sit down. When we land, you won't be going back up." Karen's mouth parted slightly, stunned. "You don't know what you're talking about," she hissed back, but Lena's voice was calm. "I know enough." Karen stood frozen in the aisle as Lena walked past her toward the rear galley. It was a moment that marked more than personal friction. It was a passing of accountability, quiet, unspoken, but irreversible. In first class, Nathaniel closed his book. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notepad. Not for writing legal briefs, not for filing complaints, just for observation. A habit he had formed decades ago, long before becoming a judge, back when he was simply a black law student navigating spaces that were never designed for him. He jotted down 2 lines. "The gatekeeper doesn't always wear a uniform, but the resistance, when it comes from the ones who refuse to stay silent." He paused, then underlined the word resistance. As Flight 786 descended toward Chicago O'Hare International Airport, the energy inside the cabin shifted. For most passengers, it was the familiar physical sensation of descent. Ears popping, tray tables locked, a sudden quiet as cell phones prepared to reconnect with the world below. But for Karen Dwyer, the descent was not just physical. It was psychological, professional, existential. She had spent the final 40 minutes of the flight compulsively checking her phone in the crew area, watching the firestorm unfold online. The name Judge Nathaniel Brooks now lit up every trending feed. Cable news anchors had begun commenting mid-broadcast. Even outlets like Forbes and The Atlantic were prepping special briefs. One CNN analyst tweeted, "If confirmed that Altura Air removed Judge Brooks from first class without cause, this is not just a PR issue. This is a systemic scandal waiting to explode." Karen had stopped reading after that. The scrolling made her sick. Her hands shook so badly that she spilled hot coffee on her service vest, a dark brown splotch seeping across the logo like shame itself. She glanced at Len, who had resumed aisle service with quiet dignity. Not a word, not a stare, just presence. It was more punishing than any shout. In seat 3A, Judge Brooks closed his notepad, folded it carefully, and placed it back into his inside jacket pocket. His expression betrayed nothing, but his eyes scanned the cabin with the practiced eye of someone who had seen systems break down from the inside. He knew the landing wouldn't mark the end. It would mark the beginning. Back at Altura Air's Chicago headquarters, The response was already in motion. The airline's chief crisis officer, Dana Mendel, stood in front of a high-resolution monitor showing Twitter in real time. Her jaw tightened as the comments multiplied by the second. How does a judge who lectures on civil liberties get bumped from first class in 2025? Brooks on board just turned into Rana Altura unworthy. I was about to book a flight with them, not anymore. We're hemorrhaging public trust, an analyst muttered beside her. And fast. Dana didn't look away from the screen. Tell legal to hold off on statements. I want a direct line to Brooks's office the moment that plane touches ground. Not a press release, not a tweet, a phone call from the CEO himself. The room froze. You want Peter to call personally? I want Peter at the gate, Dana replied. Anything less and this burns the whole brand to the ground. The wheels of Flight 786 touched the tarmac at 11:04 a.m. sharp. A gentle rumble traveled through the floor, but inside the plane, there was no applause, no cheerful chatter. Just silence. As the jet slowly taxied to its gate, Lena's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chicago. For those of you connecting to flights, please check monitors inside the terminal. We ask that you remain seated until the seatbelt sign is off. Thank you for choosing Altura Air. But the words rang hollow. Passengers began whispering, glancing down at their phones. Some had received push notifications already. Others opened the trending tab, shocked to realize they had unknowingly been inside a story that was now global. Karen stood near the forward door, fidgeting with her collar. Her hands instinctively adjusted the lapel pin that read, Service Excellence. It felt like a joke now. She felt exposed, cornered. No amount of company procedure could shield her from what was coming. The jet bridge connected. The cabin door hissed open. And there, standing just beyond the gate, was Peter Hollingsworth, the CEO of Altura Air himself. His presence was unmistakable. A tall, commanding man in a dark charcoal suit, gray temples framing a face once beloved by shareholders and media outlets alike. Behind him stood two legal aides and a communications officer holding a tablet that glowed with live feeds. Karen blinked twice. Oh, God. Passengers began disembarking, eyes widening as they passed the CEO. A few even paused, murmured things like, "That's him," or "They're here because of what happened." No one needed a briefing. They felt it. They knew it. And then came Judge Nathaniel Brooks, stepping into the jet bridge with his cane in one hand and his coat folded neatly over his arm. Peter Hollingsworth took 2 deliberate steps forward and extended his hand. "Judge Brooks," he said, his voice measured, "I'm Peter Hollingsworth, CEO of Altura Air. I've been informed of what occurred. I want to express from this company's highest office our regret and our intention to speak with you privately today on your terms." The moment was surgical, professional, but behind Peter's controlled tone was a man who had read the same headlines, understood the fallout, and knew that this wasn't about protocol anymore. It was about survival. Judge Brooks took a long look at the man in front of him. He did not immediately shake his hand. Instead, he said quietly, "You may want to start with your employees, the ones still trying to figure out what went wrong." Peter lowered his hand slightly. "We intend to." A few feet away, Karen was still at the aircraft door. She hadn't moved. Couldn't. Her legs felt like they were made of ice. Then came the voice she dreaded. "Ms. Dwyer," said a sharp voice behind her. It was the regional operations director. "I need you to step aside. You're relieved of flight duty, effective immediately, pending internal review." Karen's breath caught. This wasn't, I followed standard." "Don't speak," the director cut in. "You'll have representation soon, but right now, please exit the plane." It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but the way her name had echoed, relieved, reverberated like a personal collapse. Karen's legs finally moved. She stepped down the jet bridge, trying to keep her head up, but she couldn't stop the sting behind her eyes. Lena didn't look at her as she passed. Neither did the pilot. Her silence, her bias, and her decision to act on assumption had become a national spectacle, and it was only the beginning. In the terminal, the press had not been allowed directly near Gate 12, but that didn't stop them. Cameras zoomed in from afar. Photos of Judge Brooks stepping off the plane with the CEO were already on the Associated Press wire. One headline read, "Judge Brooks removed from first class. Airline CEO greets him at gate amid national backlash." Another, "Altitude of accountability. Altura Air faces storm over racial profiling incident." Social media had transformed a private humiliation into a public reckoning. And yet, as the terminal buzzed with whispers, cameras, and media speculation, Judge Brooks stood quietly by the window, looking out at the tarmac. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't angry. He was ready. The meeting room on the 48th floor of Altura Air's Chicago headquarters was pristine. Designed for board-level negotiations, it overlooked Lake Michigan with glass walls that let the skyline bleed into every conversation. But the beauty of the view did little to soften the air inside the room that day. At the long table sat only two people, Judge Nathaniel Brooks and Peter Hollingsworth, CEO of Altura Air. No aides, no legal representatives, no PR specialists lurking in the background. Just two men, one with institutional power built from corporate capital, the other with institutional experience forged in the crucible of justice. Peter leaned forward, fingers clasped, trying to steady his voice. "Judge Brooks, first and foremost, I want to thank you for agreeing to speak with me directly. I'm not here to defend what happened. I'm here to listen and to learn." Judge Brooks didn't smile. He simply nodded and adjusted the cuff of his blazer. "You said in your message that this meeting would be off the record," he began, "and that you wish to hear the truth without filters." "I meant that," Peter replied. "Then I'll ask you not to interrupt until I'm finished." Peter nodded. "Of course." The judge leaned back, gathering his thoughts, not to dramatize, but to deliver them with the precision that had once shaped precedent-setting decisions. "I've spent 35 years of my life fighting for equality under the law. I've seen how institutions, even with the best branding, can carry rot in their structure without even realizing it. I've studied bias, not just in individuals, but in policies, training manuals, in culture." He paused. "What happened to me on that flight was not about one woman with a personal prejudice. It was about a system that trained her to think I didn't belong, without ever using those words." Peter swallowed. "Had I been wearing a business suit instead of a sweater, would she have asked me to move? Maybe not. Had I looked less tired, less like an ordinary black man on an ordinary day? Probably not. But none of that changes the fact that my boarding pass was valid. My seat was assigned. My rights were clear." He leaned in slightly. "The only thing unclear was my worth, to her." Peter let the silence hold. It was thick, alive. Every word had landed exactly where it was meant to. The judge continued, "I've seen this pattern too many times. Authority misused, followed by apologies, followed by a diversity training, followed by more of the same. I didn't come here for an apology. I came to see what kind of man leads this company. Because how you respond to this will define whether Altura Air becomes a lesson in accountability or another case study in denial." Peter let out a slow breath. "You're right, about all of it. There's nothing I can say that would undo the damage. But there is something I can ask." He paused. "Will you help us fix it?" Judge Brooks raised an eyebrow. "Fix what?" "Everything," Peter said, almost whispering. "Not the press releases, not the slogans, the structure, the training, the internal complaint systems, the way bias is ignored when it hides behind politeness or company policy." He took a breath. "We've been running operations through metrics and efficiency, but clearly we've failed in humanity. If you're willing, I want to form an internal justice board, a real one, not cosmetic. I want your voice on it, at the helm." It was the most vulnerable Peter had looked the entire conversation. Not performative, not strategic, just real. The judge studied him in silence. "You understand this won't be comfortable for you." "I don't need comfort, I need change." Meanwhile, downstairs in the employee debriefing room, Lena sat alone. Karen had been escorted out. The rest of the flight crew had been quietly questioned. But Lena had not spoken yet. She stared down at the paper in front of her. A voluntary incident statement. Boxes to check, lines to fill. The sterile language of bureaucracy is trying to capture a human failure. She'd written nothing. When the HR representative entered, a soft-spoken woman in her 40s, Lena simply looked up. "I'd like to speak, but I won't be using that form," Lena said calmly. "I'll give my account, but I want you to record it in my words, not Altura's template." The woman blinked but nodded. "Of course," Lena began. What happened on that flight was not an isolated act of confusion. It was a moment built on thousands of small signals and decisions. Karen made the call, yes, but the culture let her believe she could, that no one would question her, that if she saw a black man alone in first class, it was perfectly acceptable to doubt him. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't shake either. I saw it in the training sessions where we were told to use visual cues to assess passenger status. I saw it when staff joked about certain routes being riskier when more passengers of color boarded. I stayed quiet. I didn't push back. I regret that now. She took a breath. I should have said something sooner, but now I'm saying it plainly. The rot isn't just in the policy, it's in the silences we allow. The HR rep finished typing and looked up. "Would you be willing to testify to that in the internal review next week?" "I'll do more than that," Lena replied. "I'll help rewrite the training, but only if this company is serious. Not about optics, about integrity." Back in the executive office, Judge Brooks stood up, adjusting his jacket. "I'll consider your offer, Mr. Hollingsworth, but I need to see action before I lend my name. I've spent too long in courtrooms where promises came cheap. Real change? That has a cost." Peter stood too, "And I'm willing to pay it." As the two men shook hands, a faint tremor of shift rippled through Altura air. Not in headlines, not yet. But something was changing, quietly, deliberately. The morning after Lena's statement, the city of Chicago woke to more than just its usual symphony of traffic, train horns, and murmurs of espresso machines. It woke to headlines. Federal judge removed from first-class seat, Altura air faces backlash. Flight discrimination sparks internal inquiry. Altura's CEO promises reform, but is it too late? Every major news network had picked it up. From CNN to local Chicago stations, the incident had exploded. Video clips, passenger testimonials, and even snippets of Karen's voice recorded mid-flight were circulating online. And one of those clips, grainy but powerful, had captured Lena's face as she stood between Karen and Judge Brooks. Silent, uneasy. It wasn't a heroic pose, but it wasn't cowardice either. It was the look of someone realizing, in real time, that silence had a cost. By noon, Warren Altura accountability was trending on social media. Think pieces poured in from former flight attendants, passengers of color, and public advocates. Everyone had a story. Everyone had something to say, but no one, perhaps, had as much power in their words as Maya Angelou. Maya sat in her apartment, blinds half drawn, fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. She was a veteran reporter, 10 years at the Chicago Tribune before going independent. She didn't chase clickbait. She chased what people buried. And this time, someone had given her a goldmine. 2 days earlier, an anonymous file had landed in her inbox, encrypted, marked only with the initials ER. Inside, a PDF titled Passenger Appearance Assessment Protocols, Internal Briefing, Altura Air, Not for Distribution. It wasn't just a training manual. It was a confidential memo, last updated 6 months ago, detailing how flight attendants were trained to identify potentially fraudulent first-class boarders. But what shocked Maya was the coded descriptors. Appearance doesn't match purchase pattern. Age to attire mismatch. Observe. Solo passengers without branded luggage. Verify with secondary ID if uncertain. Special attention. Passengers under 30 in premium cabins without elite status. And next to those lines, highlighted, were notes from a manager training session. Informal, but damning. If it's a young black man with no business attire, flag it. We don't profile, but be alert. Sometimes gut instinct helps. It was clear. The company had no official racial policy, but it had unofficial biases woven into its operations. Maya didn't react with rage. Not yet. Her job wasn't emotional. If you've ever wondered how it got this bad, I have the answer. They chose a neutral spot, A quiet cafe near Millennium Park. No cameras. Just two women and a laptop. Maya slid the screen toward Lena. As her eyes scanned the document, her face slowly drained of color. This, this is real? I verified the metadata, Maya said. Time-stamped. Internal server ID. It came from someone inside. Possibly someone scared, but honest. Lena looked up. This isn't just one bad apple. This is the orchard. Maya nodded. Exactly. She leaned forward. The public's paying attention now, but they're only seeing the surface. If you confirm this, if you can tell me whether these training sentiments were present in your sessions, then this story becomes more than a headline. It becomes history. Lena hesitated. The weight of it all pressed on her chest. But then she thought of the quiet moments, the awkward silences after Karen's remarks, the subtle warnings from supervisors to trust your gut, the way some attendants were praised for being intuitive when they flagged innocent passengers of color, and she knew. Yes, Lena said, I can confirm it. 3 days later, Maya's report dropped on her independent channel and was syndicated by 3 national networks. Unwritten protocols, how Altura Air taught its staff to profile. It was explosive, not just because of the document, but because Lena Alvarez, a current employee, had spoken on the record. She didn't attack anyone personally. She didn't name coworkers, but she told the truth. The culture never needed a memo that said discriminate. It only needed to reward those who did. Within hours, shareholder calls surged. FAA officials requested a full compliance audit, and Peter Hollingsworth, standing before a room of cameras, had to confront what no CEO wanted to admit publicly. We were wrong, not just in action, but in assumption. This is no longer about one incident. This is about everything we let happen in the shadows. Judge Brooks sat in his study, television off, reading the printed version of Maya's exposé. His fingers brushed over the lines Lena had confirmed, and then slowly he smiled. It wasn't joy, it was vindication. Because sometimes justice doesn't come in courtrooms. Sometimes it comes from voices that refuse to stay quiet. The auditorium was packed. Over 300 Altura Air employees filled the room at headquarters, and thousands more watched via live stream from regional offices around the country. Cameras had been banned, phones silenced. This was the first internal town hall in the company's history to be designated as mandatory ethical review. But the truth was, everyone came willingly. There was an electricity in the air, a tension born not of outrage but of anticipation. People were done whispering. They wanted answers, and they wanted them from the source. CEO Peter Hollingsworth stood off to the side of the stage, eyes fixed on the woman adjusting the microphone at the center. Lena Alvarez didn't wear a blazer today. She stood in her flight attendant uniform, pressed, spotless, unyielding. But her voice, when she began to speak, held none of the corporate polish Altura had spent years training into her. It was real, raw, and it struck the room like a bell. I didn't come here to accuse. I came here to admit, she began. For years, I thought I was just following protocol. I believed that if I was polite, if I followed instructions, I couldn't possibly be hurting anyone. But now I understand. Silence isn't neutral. Silence is permission, and I gave it. There was no clapping, just silence, listening. When Karen Wexler removed Judge Brooks from his seat, I froze. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what would happen if I said it. I was afraid of losing my job, but what I should have feared more was losing my soul. It took that moment, and the courage of the man we failed, to wake me up. Lena took a breath, fingers trembling around her notes. This isn't about one employee or one policy. This is about the culture we've built. A culture that rewards gut feelings when they align with bias, that punishes staff for speaking up but praises them for avoiding disruptions. That trains us to smile at passengers while silently judging who belongs and who doesn't. I am part of that culture, but I won't be anymore. Still no applause, but no one moved. No one blinked. I ask all of you, look at your own choices, not just the obvious ones, the quiet ones, the overlooked ones. Because it's in those small, unseen decisions that discrimination grows roots. I can't fix this alone, But if you're watching this from Phoenix or Boston or Denver, and you felt that same sick twist in your gut when something felt wrong and you said nothing, today's your day to change that. She stepped back, eyes misted, pulse pounding. For a second, Peter thought the moment was complete. Lena had said what needed to be said. But just as he turned toward the mic to thank her, a hand went up in the back of the room. An older woman with short silver curls and piercing gray eyes stood slowly. She wasn't part of Altura's staff. "Permission to speak?" she asked. Peter hesitated. "And you are?" The woman stepped forward, voice clear. "My name is Dr. Vivian Keating. I'm a former FAA civil rights consultant. And 10 years ago, I filed a complaint against this company, one that was ignored." A collective intake of breath swept the auditorium. Peter frowned. "Dr. Keating, I don't believe—" "I have a copy," she interrupted, holding up a manila folder. "In 2013, I conducted an undercover audit of Altura's boarding procedures across 7 airports. My team recorded a pattern of discretionary ID checks that disproportionately targeted young Black and Latino male passengers, especially those in business or first class. We submitted findings. We asked for a policy review. We were told the data was inconclusive." She looked around the room. But it wasn't. It was inconvenient. And it was buried. Gasps echoed. Someone in the front row swore under their breath. Lena stared in disbelief. Peter's voice hardened. "That was a different administration. I was not CEO at the time." "And yet the results continued under your watch," Vivian replied. "The names may have changed, but the silence didn't." She walked forward, placing the file on the podium. "This is not revenge. It's resurrection. You don't need a PR campaign. You need an exorcism. Root this poison out from its source, or this company will never fly clean." Then, without waiting for permission, she walked off stage and out the side exit. She didn't need to stay for applause. She had said her truth. Back on stage, Peter slowly approached the microphone. His face was pale. His jaw was tight. But this time, there was no spin. "She's right." The words hung in the air. "She's right," he repeated. "When I took this position, I believed in metrics, in customer satisfaction scores, in stock performance. I believed that if the numbers looked good, we must be doing something right. But justice isn't data. It's not percentages. It's people. People like Judge Brooks, like Lena, like every employee who's had to choose between their conscience and their career." He turned toward Lena, his voice dropping. "And like you, I was silent. I believed a clean report meant a clean conscience. It didn't." He took a deep breath, then looked into the camera, broadcasting live to every Altura office in the nation. "As of today, I'm authorizing a full independent audit of all training, hiring, and flight operation protocols. Every document, every guideline, every unspoken rule exposed, and I will not oversee it. A new ethics chair will be appointed externally. We will rebuild this airline's foundation, not from marketing slogans, but from truth." Then, without waiting for a script, Peter Hollingsworth removed the CEO pin from his jacket, placed it on the podium, and stepped away. The room erupted, not with applause, but with murmurs. Not chaos, but a strange, overwhelming quiet. Change wasn't a cheer. It was a weight, settling on everyone's shoulders at once. As Lena sat back down, heart still hammering, she realized something extraordinary. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid, because someone had broken the silence, and everyone had heard it. 3 weeks after the explosive town hall meeting, Altura Air was no longer the same company. Gone were the glossy posters touting world-class comfort in every terminal. Gone were the smiling, scripted welcome videos that played before takeoff. What replaced them was something far less polished, but infinitely more real. A sign that simply read, "We're listening." Lena Alvarez, now temporarily appointed as head of in-flight ethics, stood before a whiteboard in a small conference room at Altura's Denver headquarters. Around her were 6 diverse employees, 2 flight attendants, a gate agent, a pilot, a janitor, and a customer service rep. Each handpicked for their courage in submitting anonymous reports during the audit's early phase. The room felt like a war council, not a board meeting. Truth weighted it. "We have over 240 complaints submitted in just 17 days, Lena said, her voice steady. 94 involve passengers of color. 51 includes security escalation without policy justification. And 11, she paused, alleged direct retaliation by senior staff after reporting discrimination. The room went silent. Janice, the gate agent from Orlando, shook her head. I used to think it was just a bad apple here or there. But this feels systemic. Lena nodded. It is, and we're going to prove it. At that moment, the door opened. A tall woman with silver curls and clear, focused eyes stepped in. Vivian Keating. Though she technically had no title at Altura, she'd become the moral compass of this internal investigation. Independent, relentless, unafraid. I have something, she said simply, and placed a thin black folder on the table. Inside was a report, marked confidential, in red ink, dated 5 years earlier. It's from the office of Harold Brenner, she explained, VP of Operations at the time, still on the board today. The report was created after a whistleblower raised concerns about racially biased deboarding practices during emergency reroutes. What happened to the whistleblower? Asked Marcus, the young customer service rep from Atlanta. Vivian's eyes didn't waver. Terminated within 6 weeks for unprofessional conduct. No formal investigation was ever launched. This report? It was buried, never submitted to the FAA. Lena's stomach turned. Brenner's still in charge of gate training procedures. Vivian gave a grim nod. And based on flight data cross-matching, his name appears in 48% of flagged incidents over the last 3 years. This goes deeper than we thought, Janice murmured. No, Vivian said softly. It goes exactly as deep as we feared. They stared at the folder in silence. Not just a document, a doorway. Meanwhile, across the country in New York, the fallout from the scandal had reached every corner of the aviation industry. News anchors dissected Lena's town hall speech nightly. Advocacy groups held sit-ins at major airports, demanding that other airlines conduct similar audits. A ripple was becoming a wave, and in a quiet suburban office, Judge Marshall Brooks watched it all from his laptop. He hadn't spoken publicly since the incident. He hadn't needed to. Lena's courage had done what his silence could not, started a reckoning. But today he was ready to speak. He typed a short email. To Lena Alvarez. Subject, ready when you are. Let's talk. Marshall. Back at Altura, Lena and Vivian moved swiftly. They compiled every document, every audio clip, every ignored complaint and testimony into a single master report. They called it the Cabin Pressure Report. Within it were not only patterns of discrimination, but the names of executives who had known and done nothing. At the top of the list, Harold Brenner. On a chilly Tuesday morning, Brenner was summoned to a closed-door session with the newly formed Independent Accountability Panel. He arrived in a crisp gray suit with a smug expression that hinted he still didn't quite believe the tides had turned. But he hadn't met Vivian Keating in full swing. Mr. Brenner, she began, her tone neutral, would you like to explain why a 2019 report identifying racial profiling during emergency deboardings was never submitted to federal oversight? Brenner's jaw flexed. Those claims were unsubstantiated. Vivian slid a photo across the table, a screenshot. His signature is on the bottom of the suppressed report. And this? I was advised. By whom? She snapped. Silence. Vivian leaned forward. Mr. Brenner, we have testimony from 4 former employees, 3 independent contractors, and dozens of incident reports that all point to one thing: a coordinated culture of concealment. You didn't just fail to act, you orchestrated a cover-up. He paled but said nothing. You're being placed on immediate suspension pending further legal review, said one of the panel members, an attorney flown in from Washington. Your access badge has already been revoked. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was surgical, a clean incision in a rotting limb. Later that night, Lena met with Judge Brooks in person. They sat on a bench outside the Denver terminal, where everything had started. You didn't have to meet me here, he said quietly. I did, Lena replied. I needed to stand in the place where I failed you and promise I never will again. Marshall looked at her, and the softness returned in his eyes. You didn't fail me. You woke up, and then you helped wake up others. That's all any of us can do. He reached into his coat and handed her a small leather journal. "What's this?" she asked. "I started writing about that flight," he said. "What did it mean? Not just the hurt, but the history behind the hurt. I think there's something in here that might help you." She opened the first page. The title read, "Notes from Seat 3A, A Journey Toward Dignity." Her throat tightened. "I'll honor this," she whispered. "Every word." Marshall smiled. "Then it was worth it." As news of Brenner's suspension spread, other companies began to take note. Airline boards scrambled to avoid the same fate. Diversity officers were no longer figureheads. They were being handed real authority. Change was no longer a buzzword. It had become a demand. But Lena knew this wasn't the end. It was only part 9 of a story still being written. The sky was clear that morning. The kind of crisp, flawless blue that pilots dream about and passengers take photos of. It had been 97 days since the town hall meeting. 97 days since Lena Alvarez stood in front of a crowd and shattered the silence. Now she stood in the glass atrium of Altura's newly named Equity and Justice Training Center, where former break rooms had been converted into real classrooms, and old slogans had been replaced with bold declarations. Respect is not optional. Presence does not equal permission. Every passenger, every time. It wasn't just rebranding, it was a rebirth. Lena had just finished briefing a new cohort of flight attendants, diverse, inquisitive, and sharp-eyed. Most were younger than she had been when she first put on the Navy uniform, but they asked better questions, tougher questions, and that gave her hope. As the group filed out, Vivian Keating approached with a soft smile. "They remind you of anyone?" she teased. Lena chuckled. "They remind me of who I could have been, if someone had trained me right." Vivian nodded. "Well, you're doing that now." The past few months had been a whirlwind. Following Harold Brenner's removal, a federal investigation uncovered that Altura had knowingly suppressed dozens of bias-related incidents. Several board members resigned. New policies, real ones, were enacted with enforceable consequences. More importantly, the cabin pressure report had been adopted across 4 major airlines as a baseline for reform. Lena hadn't expected the momentum to last, but it did, because the world, at least this part of it, was done pretending it didn't see. Still, Lena had one more decision to make. Vivian gestured toward the press podium being set up outside the training center. "Are you ready for your speech?" Lena hesitated. "I'm not sure I want to be the story anymore." "But you already are," Vivian said, "and you're the ending it deserves." Outside, cameras clicked. Microphones lined the podium. Reporters were eager to ask about the next phase of Altura's reform, about Lena's new role, about her journey. But when she stepped up, she didn't start with policy. She started with silence. 6 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Enough to make people shift in their seats. Enough to echo what had happened to Judge Marshall Brooks in that first-class cabin, when silence was a wound, not a shield. Then she spoke. "There was a moment," Lena began, "when I stood in front of a man who had been humiliated because I failed to see the system I was upholding. I thought I was just following policy, but what I was doing was protecting a pattern, one that made people like him invisible and people like me comfortable." She paused. The wind shifted slightly, brushing her blazer. "That moment changed me. Not because it made me feel guilty, but because it made me accountable. And accountability is where change begins." Lena took a breath. Today, Altura is launching a multi-airline partnership initiative called The Gate Opens Forward, a coalition of carriers, regulators, and communities dedicated to dismantling racial bias in aviation from the inside out. A collective murmur passed through the press. "We're not done. We're just starting." Applause rose, not just from the press, but from staff members, flight crews, and even travelers passing through the terminal windows. In the crowd, Judge Brooks stood off to the side, sunglasses covering his eyes, but not the pride in his stance. Lena spotted him and gave the faintest nod. He smiled. Then he did something he hadn't done since that day. He booked a flight. 2 weeks later, Lena found herself at Gate 19. Yes, the same gate where it had all begun. She wasn't in uniform this time. No clipboard, no announcement duties, just a ticket in hand. "Boarding Group 1, the agent called, smiling as she recognized her. "Ms. Alvarez, "We've been waiting for you." Lena boarded the plane. Seat 3A, window seat. As she settled in, her eyes scanned the cabin. It was quieter than she remembered, gentler. There was no nervous glance from the passengers of color, no stiff smile from the crew trying to mask discomfort. Instead, there was a kind of shared breath, like everyone had stopped holding it in. The plane took off. High above the clouds, Lena pulled out a small leather journal. Marshall's journal, the one he had given her. She flipped to a page marked with a folded corner. "We carry more than luggage when we fly. We carry history, hope, and sometimes pain. The job of the airline is not just to transport our bodies, but to respect our presence. To say, you belong, you matter. Welcome aboard." Tears prickled the corners of her eyes. She looked out the window. Below her, the earth rolled on. Cities lit up. Rivers curved like stories still being told. And in that moment, Lena Alvarez understood what her next chapter would be. She wasn't going back to the skies. She was building a new runway, one where dignity could take flight. Impartiality without awareness is not justice. Lena thought she was neutral, but neutrality in a broken system often protects the brokenness. Real justice requires active awareness, listening, and the courage to confront discomfort. Silence can either shield injustice or elevate truth. When Marshall was silent, it was to protect his dignity. When Lena used silence in her speech, it was to hold space for pain and to give weight to what followed. Not all silence is equal, but when used with intention, it can become a powerful voice. One voice is enough to start an echo. Lena's awakening didn't end with her. It rippled across Altura, into other airlines, and across the nation. Change doesn't require a megaphone. It begins with one person choosing to stop pretending. If this story moved you, let it move someone else. Like the story? Drop a comment and tell us what part resonated with you most. Share this video, because stories like this deserve to be heard. And don't forget to subscribe for more justice-driven stories that remind us of the power of truth.